Okay, welcome back, everyone. The next session is our panel session, and I'm really pleased to introduce the panel session and our moderator, Joe Kocham. So Joe is the Executive Director of the National Spectrum Consortium. Prior to NSC, he co-founded and served as the CEO of US Ignite, where he was the Principal Investigator and Project Director for the Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research, PAWR Project Office. That was a $100 million program funded by the NSF and a consortium of more than 35 wireless companies and associations. So over to you, Joe.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Paul. Good to be here. And I'm very glad to have an extremely august panel here. I will just spend a minute to go down the line and give everybody a brief one-sentence introduction. They have much more impressive backgrounds that I'm sure you can find online. But in the interest of time and the fact that we have a good conversation, some good topics, and some great panelists. First, we have Tracy Van Brakle, Principal Member of the Technical Staff for AT&T. Thank you for being here, Tracy. Rich Lapen is the Director of Business Development and Government Defense Solutions for Viavi. Thanks, Rich. Hardik Jain is the co-founder and CTO of GXC. Thanks for being here, Hardik. Dolores Shaffer is the Program Manager at Science and Technology Associates and the Computing SME at the Future G Office of OUSD R&E. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, Sudharman Jayaweera joins us from NSF, where he's the Program Director in the Emerging Technology section of the relatively new Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, TIP. Thank you, SJ. So thank you very much. Glad to have everyone here. Let me just flip my notes. I'd love to start broadly, I think, asking a little bit about, I'm going to assume for a moment that everybody we have here listening and participating is a fan and a supporter of Open RAN and open networking, so we don't need to make this a controversy. On the other hand, if you are an outsider reading recent trade reports or other things, you might wonder what the current state of Open RAN is in the ecosystem broadly in the United States or in the world. And so maybe I'll start to ask those of you here to chime in a little bit about some of the criticisms or some of the arrows being fired currently in the state of the ecosystem, what you think the current state of Open RAN is, and where you see some of the gaps or some of the needs for development. And then we'll kind of move on from there to talk about how to fill some of those. Let's see, we have a couple of microphones. Who wants to start?
Sure.
All right.
So, well, I'm SJ, Sudharman Jayaweera from NSF. So there's a lot of gaps, I think. One of the most important things that we talk about the Open RAN and the open systems. A lot of that is started, I think, with the question of interoperability and interoperability of hardware. So one of the things that I keep always asking is, what about the software interoperability? Can you plug in srsRAN CU with somebody else's DU? And that's just giving us a very simple example. If we don't have the open software interoperability, then we'll be back to square one. It will be one vendor develop software versus one vendor develop hardware or the proprietary full system. So that's one of the things. The other thing is who maintains the business case for in the long term, who will maintain open source systems. Whether it is NSF or DoD funding, that's limited. That's a finite time period. After some time, once that funding dries, who will maintain it? So you need a strong business case to make sure that can actually sustain. The other thing is, a third one is related to that. When you have dual licensing, how do you make sure that things don't diverge too much? Fourth one, security, which is one of the key things that we heard in the morning also. That's just four.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dolores.
Okay. Well, for me, Open RAN doesn't necessarily equate to open source. And I have worked closely with the 5G challenge that OUSD funded and NTIA executed for us. And if the first thing is just interoperability, and in our 2022 challenge, some folks could not work in an end-to-end system having different vendors in that RAN. This year, actually contestants did better, and we actually got people doing mobility with heterogeneous RANs. And that is to say, like one RU vendor with a CUDU vendor just in one RAN, and also in different vendors in another. But interoperability is still a big challenge, because as probably everybody here knows, you can be compliant with the Open RAN, well, with the O-RAN Alliance specs and with the 3GPP standard, and yet that doesn't mean you interoperate with somebody else that also passed those. So that's a problem. And I think people do have that concern about security. Although I would think with open source RAN that at least people could examine, or you could get a lot of people to examine them. So.
Great. So Hardik, we're hearing security, but we're also hearing economic concerns. We're also hearing that some of the technical interoperability concerns may be on their way to resolving, and that may be good news for the ecosystem. What do you think?
Yep. I think for me, Open RAN being a new technology and disrupting in a mature telecom stack ecosystem would require some more time to mature, given some of these things. One particular thing for Open RAN that I think has been a big challenge is requiring a lot of system integration. Typically, operators buy things from Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, etc., and they get like a fully integrated system that just works out of the box. And when you disrupt that and you make open models and open components, that require somebody to integrate these things together. And so there's a gap, like from just having things to work together, which is interoperability, but also folks who integrate it, manage it, and then provide confidence to operators so that they can deploy these solutions. And so I feel like that has happened so far with Dish and Rakuten, are two deployments or two operators that have adopted Open RAN, and will start to happen more and more. We as a company, GXE, that I represent, we're also using Open RAN in 5G, and we've been able to do that because we primarily provide enterprise private networks, and in that case, it's more of a greenfield, like how Dish's deployment has been a greenfield deployment and has a lot more opportunity to do to start with a new technology. And so these things will take time, especially for operators with existing network to start to adopt it.
So you're seeing more opportunity in some of the enterprise applications. I was interviewing somebody, an analyst last week, who were saying he sees a pretty rosy, despite what you might hear in the press, he sees a pretty rosy outlook for Open RAN in the case of enterprise, because it is in fact in many cases greenfield.
Yeah, the whole 7.2 split, as well as the architecture using new techniques like front haul multiplexing with 7.2x. The deployment of those are much easier and much more scalable in an enterprise environment than are so much with like a G node B, node B type solution, as well as the feature velocity in terms of like building new features or providing high performance, etc. A Open RAN based solution in all of our analysis has been much more favorable, and so that's what we're going with.
It's great, Rich.
Yeah, from our team side, I mean, we're a test vendor, so we live and breathe in that space. And Hardik touched on it a second ago. So performance. So we'll see we kind of view the adoption being a little bit easier once be able to demonstrate that performance along with the interoperability. So some of those key tenets that from a test vendor standpoint, performance, accessibility, security, and scale. Those are the types of things that we build into our solutions across the board. So I generally second everyone so far.
Great.
So I think everybody knows that AT&T and its employees, myself included, have been major influencers as well as beneficiaries of open source, open standards back to the layer 1 days, and layer 2, layer 3 fueled the internet revolution. And as founding members, one of the founding operator members of the ORAN Alliance, we expect to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of Open RAN technologies. Nevertheless, as we like to say, there are challenges. We're AT&T, Verizon, Orange, a bunch of us, big mobile network operators with enormous embedded bases, 5G LTE RAN. We are not ripping that out. That would be so wasteful. So we need strategies, and I asked about this. How can we, cautiously, conservatively, because let's face it, Department of Defense uses our network. FirstNet uses our network. I don't really care about a 20-year-old who can't game for 2 minutes, but I do care if there's an accident and one of my kids needs to be, medevaced immediately. So, we're looking at, conformance testing is very important. Interoperability testing, both fundamental and foundational. How can we get more focused on what I said earlier, end-to-end evaluations of a 5G system, inclusive of srsRAN components, and slowly but surely achieving some degree of parity with respect to features, performance, reliability, security. Not necessarily in that order, but we have work to do. We've made a lot of progress, more work to do.
Well, let's stay with that for a second, Tracy. So you're talking a little bit about the need for more test beds, for more test facilities, for more integration testing to fill some of these gaps that we just identified. What does that look like? What is your vision? Where does the need for an open and interoperable test environment fill gaps that you see from the AT&T side, or gaps that we've identified here?
You're going to like this answer.
I knew I would
know.
like this.
Okay. So before there was such a brilliant notion as National Science Foundation Platform Advanced Wireless Research, there were a couple of labs that tried to do, wireless innovation, WinLab, Rutgers. And I first learned about the importance of test beds when I was trying to do a live demonstration with wireless transport equipment, both microwave, millimeter wave, point to point, point to multi-point. And we were so proud of ourselves because we created this real primitive netconf-yang management interface to change frequencies across microwave radios from everybody, including Huawei and ZTE. And getting NEC and srsRAN and Huawei and ZTE and did I mention Fujitsu? I should have mentioned Fujitsu. Ericsson and Nokia in an AT&T lab where we're cooking the secret sauce just wasn't happening. So that's when I first became a huge fan of working in what's now an NSF power site. And since that time, we've done lots of great work with the assistance of Powder, University of Utah. I don't know if I saw them earlier.
They're here somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. It's not a coincidence that I'm here at Virginia Tech. Lots of excellent students, opportunities, expertise. That is very hard to find within an operator's, employees who are all out getting the real world network to work. Whereas graduate students they don't get tired. You give them coffee, you give them pizza. And earlier someone said something about passion. So
Yeah.
very much a big fan.
SJ, talk if you could a little bit about the benefit of an open source environment in a test bed such as these. You know, what are we talking about open source test bed specifically? What do you get from that versus just, you know, a whole bunch of test equipment from a bunch of vendors where people can, you know, play around a little bit? What comes of a more open source environment in that sense?
Well, I think I'm happy to hear Tracy like the Power Platform. So that was, if Thiago was here, I think he would be very happy to hear that.
That's
too.
right.
Because that was a big investment from NSF part for to enable those platforms. Now, from NSF point of view, I think something that we, you know, have been internally talking about is that as much as we think the Power Platform was a good investment, I think the community hasn't really used it as much as we would like to see. So we believe that the 4 Power Platforms have great capabilities, and some of them actually provide the Open RAN implementations also that community can build on and make available for advancement of research and development. So from NSF point of view, we think, I mean, initially the Power Platforms was conceived as a way to accelerate and help and accelerate the basic research as well. But now with the TIP Directorate, they can also be a great resource for the technology translation.
Yeah.
And especially from TIP point of view, that is something that I'm particularly interested in seeing. Those platforms will be used by technology developers. And there is no real, you know, initiative to make that broadly accessible. And sometimes, you know, even take something like SPI or STTR programs. Those companies can use this resource rather than actually trying to build things, you know, in a small company using, you know, limited funds. But none of that is happening. So there's a great opportunity for them to be more impactful, and I hope that will happen as these platforms come online, you know, with full capabilities. I hope that will happen. And also there are the other initiatives that TIP is looking at. Some are collaboration with DoD and NIST, and to enable specifically for the Open RAN.
Yeah.
There's one RFI out now, and also we are looking at the continuation of the RINGS program. So all those can, you know, help advance this ecosystem. But I think we would like, you know, for the community to make an effort to actually use those resources.
Anybody really, what do you think are the gaps? I mean, maybe Dolores, you've been working on the 5G challenge, or at least the current iteration. And what are the gaps in some of the interoperability challenges that you think could be better addressed with some of the with more test beds or with a expanded test bed presence? Are there specific problems to tackle?
Yeah, yes. Something interesting with the 5G challenge is we used both years Cable Labs as the host lab.
Yep.
So they have a 5G lab,
Yep.
and that's where the competitors go, and they worked. And we found out that the contestants really liked that opportunity. I mean, it's that opportunity to just be in a lab and get a little chance to try things. I mean, most of their time is focused on meeting the challenges, but actually this year we gave some in-kind prizes. So a couple of the contestants will go on to have extra time in the lab at Cable Labs, and they were really happy about that. So a good thing about the test lab is you can get people in there and they're collaborating and they're face-to-face.
Kind of unstructured experimentation.
And you figure, I mean, well, if you're going to integrate, I mean, one way to integrate is like, I'm going to say probably at a legacy company where somebody top down can make some demands on all of the subsystems. But you know what I mean? In Open RAN, you're not doing that. You have these different vendors, and if you want them to be interoperable, they have to have some give and take.
Yeah.
So it's good to be in the lab. But I also want to say, even talking about the fact that sometimes test beds are not utilized as highly as they could be. It's hard for the government to put more money into them if they feel like, you know, they're not really being utilized. I mean, you need to get to why the current ones are not as utilized as they could be.
Well, that's exactly, I think that's a fantastic point, because I think you constantly hear requests for additional tests and experimentation. Sometimes the sort of blue sky, anything goes, let's just see what happens. On the flip side, that can seem wasteful, right? Because just throwing the doors open to multi-million-dollar facilities staffed with either graduate students or professional staff or both, and saying, I don't know, what can you come up with here? You're going to go down a lot of blind alleys.
Yeah.
So who has a suggestion for either how you manage the messaging of that, such that we talk about, hey, we're going to go down a bunch of blind alleys and that's how this works, or we can be more efficient about this and here's how. Are there models or suggestions?
I think it's more outreach.
More outreach, okay.
I think I mean, I can understand, I'm also coming from academia. University professors don't have much of a bandwidth, or sometimes, you know, they are not the best in terms of the outreach and, you know, publicizing what they have as capabilities. But these platforms are multi-million-dollar platforms. So they have a lot of capabilities, and, you know, sometimes people like to have the hardware in their lab, you know, the few, you know, so the USRPs, and, you know, you do something. But like somebody mentioned this morning, if you want to do at scale testing, it has to be accessible. It has to be easily accessible. When the learning curve for using it is too much time consuming, you know, academics with, you know, graduate students, you know, they're not going to be very keen on that. So that's one side of that, the outreach and making it more accessible, easily accessible, flexible, you know, all that. Now, also, I haven't seen actually outreach to industry to use them. And there, I think I would, you know, think that there is a business case to be made. You can make money out of that, you know, provide it as a service. But I haven't seen that.
Well, Hardik, what would it, maybe you do a ton of this, but what would it take for GXE to be more involved and more engaged in more of these test beds?
Yeah, I think one of the example is we're talking to the test bed in Iowa State, where so some of our customers on the commercial side are smart agriculture, and food processing, and so that the test bed that there is in Iowa State, that's more more geared towards that, and so we're talking to them, for either being able to deploy our solution and build use cases on top of that, that we can then take to our end customers.
So Paul and the SRS team deserve credit for potentially helping bring together an example of commercial entities using an NSF testbed. Make sure Thiago hears that too. That's great though. I mean, that's great. Rich, you all power many of these efforts, you know, whether they're open source or, you know, proprietary testbeds or other things. Do you have any sort of best practices, any examples of where you see it working better, where you see the utilization higher, where you see the collaboration higher? Thoughts that you have there?
Some thoughts. So, you know, like everywhere else, a lot of these labs, the cost of test equipment is not cheap. We look to address it with different levels of scale, but when we get to the performance question, sometimes that does involve an investment. There was a trend a while back within a lot of the larger operators to federate multiple labs around the country. And I think with the different labs that we're talking about here and private networking, there's an opportunity to federate some of these resources. So if there's something that may not be available in one location, that you would have access to those test resources, which could be the equipment, maybe it's the methodology, the automation, the orchestration to make that happen, or the staff.
Yeah.
So those types of things tend to be game changers.
That's great. Tracy, AT&T has a lot of test beds, right? You can test a lot of things at AT&T, but why are you a fan, or why are you a proponent of some of these open, interoperable test beds? Why would an open source, open RAN test bed be valuable to you and AT&T?
Okay, I'm going to go left to right.
Good.
First of all, because there's a business case for operators to have test networks, labs, test beds, both for conformance and interoperability testing, as well as conducting not a loosey-goosey, oh, let's see what happens, but a fairly well-defined and documented proof of concept with, again, clear success criteria. And doing private labs at AT&T, it's astronomically expensive. So there's a business case for it. And that's one of the reasons why you'll see not just AT&T, but AT&T and Dish and Verizon all coming together to co-host some of these ORAN open testing and integration centers. ARA, Hongwei, Powder's somewhere.
Yes. There they are. Hey guys.
Cosmos, I don't think Cosmos is here today. Northeastern.
Yep.
We are very much beneficiaries. Operators have to cooperate and collaborate too. There are 5G, next G use cases that cannot succeed without multi-operator cooperation. So next, Dolores, on behalf of Team Fujitsu, that included AT&T in a small way, we are delighted to have the in-kind prize that lets either Fujitsu or with or without AT&T spend a week at your lab. I think what you've been doing with the NTIA 5G Challenge and now the RIC Forum, we're very glad we have an extra week to get our application in. It's definitely raised awareness, and it's also added more discipline and rigor. And it's great to do things off the cuff, but we have to have reproducible results. And I think I already mentioned ARA. ARA is perfect for a structured proof of concept that has to do with spectrum optimization, as well as private 5G private cellular network interop or integration with 5G LTE commercial. And then last but not least, it's incredibly expensive. And we have Viavi software, test automation software, test care in our AT&T lab. And you don't get anywhere without test automation software and the hardware software to simulate, emulate, and see if it works before you take the plunge with real equipment. But nothing can be single vendor anymore. So we can't afford to do things the way we did in the past.
We had another panelist who might have been the best to speak to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there international models of test and integration, international test bed facilities, other things that you think show a good example of where the US might go, or highlight things that we might not have here in the US that would be valuable? Are there thoughts that any of you have, things you've come across in your work?
I don't want to hog the mic, but I know the answer. Yes.
Okay, good.
Unfortunately, Ashutosh Dutta could not be here today, but the IEEE, and I forget the name of the group, it's Future Networks or they have test beds all over the world, and they are building out a test bed, not just for the United States. It will have an international reach for open 5G, NextG, proofs of concept, as well as certification and conformance testing.
That's great. Any other things you think that are lacking, or models, maybe Rich, things that you come across in with other customers?
I'm going to think about that.
Okay. No, I don't want to put anybody in the spot. Like I said, I had primed Ashutosh to answer that, but
Yeah, one thing, maybe slight bit of a tangent, but one thing that especially in the private 5G segment, where we're working on the device interoperability or end user device ecosystem development, something that has not had so much focus in some of these new spectrums that are coming out, like for example CBRS. There's a lot more maturity for in LTE for that, but not so much for 5G. And on top of that, if you have these open RAN stacks, which are like integrated systems from different vendors. Lots of times there are issues with compatibility of the UE stack with the RAN and the core stack, both RAN and the core stack. And so that's one gap that we see. We don't do extensive testing like the operators do, or there's no body or regulation yet. OnGo Alliance in US is doing some of that, but that also is in a specific spectrum, not in other spectrums across the world. So that's a gap that I see that we probably need to fill especially for adoption of private 5G worldwide.
That's great. And so I was going to pivot a little bit and talk, there have been some discussions about places where the US could continue to fund additional open source test and integration, specifically around Open RAN. It sounds like you're identifying, Hardik, that UE, there's a big gap in the UEs. Where are those gaps? And for instance, NTIA put out a NOFO about Open RAN test and integration. There's these other efforts with the ODICs as they are spreading themselves. What good ideas have you had? What additional, what would you like to see NTIA put in the next NOFO that they didn't put in this last one? What other agency efforts are you seeing that, need to be a part of this in order to expand that and fill some of these gaps?
For me?
Anybody? Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
I think making test and automation more accessible to vendors and in some form could be super helpful for folks from like if I'm an RU vendor or a CUD vendor or a RIC vendor or an XApp vendor, somehow be able to get easier, inexpensive access to test and automation tools that could be super valuable.
Yeah, one of the things I'm going back to the comment about the pricing. So the more we know as a test vendor, the more we know about the end applications, like what the end customer wants to do, allows us to tailor our test solutions a little more refined way. Otherwise, we come at the problem with a Swiss Army knife and a big one, and those tend to be very expensive if we don't know what the end goal is. So we can be more surgical with a scalpel approach. If we know what those applications are, we know what those use cases are, and some sense of the scale early on in the process. So if we have that, then we can address the scale or the pricing questions, and we can be more adaptable in that. And I think overall the test bed performs better as well.
So future funding opportunities having very narrowly or well-defined test cases.
Scope of work, problem statements. We saw some of that out of OUSD with NSC and IWRP efforts with the first two tranches, with really generally a pretty good framework about what those problems were that they were trying to solve. And maybe some of the challenges are a little more broad. I don't know, but
Yeah.
maybe something to think about.
It seems to me that's a little bit, what's interesting there is that there's a little bit of tension, right? Some of the value that folks are identifying in these testbed facilities is that they are open-ended, that they are answering questions that maybe people don't know about going in, and that at the same time, that also means that the facility itself is going to be more expensive because it needs to be more flexible. So finding a way to strike that balance somehow.
Agreed, but I look after the government and defense customers and recognize that part of the challenge, we may not get all of those use cases with that level of detail explained up front. Some of that's going to be held back if we don't have people on board who are cleared, who are working in these labs. That's an ongoing problem. So, but I would agree with that. So.
That's interesting. That's an interesting balance to strike. I don't know. Does anybody have thoughts about how Dolores, in the challenge, do you think about perhaps how to both allow for some of the blue sky, more inventive thinking, but also scope the problem down narrow enough that it's achievable? I mean, how do you all come at that kind of a problem?
In the 5G challenge, we had to be pretty focused. And so we had tests written in advance. And
Okay,
those were the tests that they had to pass.
I see.
I will say that some of the vendors did note to us, like particularly small, very small vendors, that they just couldn't afford Viavi or Keysight equipment on their own. It was the first time that they, really got access to them. So, I mean, it was valuable for them just for that. But we had our limited, we had about 24 weeks of testing total, and we had about 10 different subsystems go through in that time. So, things were kind of tight. And I think actually one thing that the challenge couldn't do, I mean, it could show interoperability, but something that I would think that if you're really going to buy these systems you want is a much longer term testing where just keep things up running, because if you're going to use them in the field, you want to be confident that they run for weeks, years, whatever,
through a variety of experience, through environments and situations. SJ, thoughts about ways in which have you had more detailed thoughts about, or maybe in other programs that I'm not as familiar with, about ways in which you can bring more of the commercial entities into some of these academic facilities? Because I think, one of the benefits we saw from the power platforms was that you had access to graduate students who approached many of these problems with a passion, and they came at them from perhaps a different angle than a commercial operator or equipment manufacturer might. And yet, universities aren't built to necessarily crank out high volume, long duration, testing, They're looking for new and novel cases. They're looking for the edge case that you can write a paper on. How do you balance some of those aspects, and how have you been able to attract, continue to attract and keep some of these commercial partners into rings or some of these other programs?
Yeah, so TIP has several new programs. Those are not, I would even say not primarily targeted towards academics.
Right.
And that goes to actually backing up a little bit to NSF mission. Usually the academic scientific community thinks that NSF is all about basic research, but NSF has two other basic research is one out of the three main kind of mission the aspects of NSF. So the TIP try to address those other two aspects. One of them is the ensuring national security.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is the economic prosperity of the nation. So, and that essentially goes into the technology translation and this societal impact of basic research. So there are several programs like the convergence accelerators, regional engines that we just finalized in the final awards. While universities are partners of those initiatives, there's a lot of the other entities, the beyond universities are involved in. So we believe that through that actually they can make an impact. Now, another aspect of that, specifically coming to the wireless telecom, advanced telecom, 5G and IMT 2030, 6G initiatives, one of the things that 5G did not do was that initially, although the 5G uniqueness was touted as the enabling verticals, but as time goes on, somehow that fell on the wayside. So I think even the test beds and the development, they can actually try to bring in the use cases, verticals, into the mix as the technology develops, and that might help with the setting the goals, and also in terms of actually be developing the technology for the societal impact, not the in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So and some of I'm talking, I'm not talking NSF policy here. I'm talking, actually everything that I'm talking here. They are not NSF policy. That's I should disclose. This is my belief. So I think there is an opportunity for us to get ahead and make an impact in 6G or whatever the next G. If we actually plan for that, that is bring in the verticals, the use cases as we actually develop the technology and we go into the standardization. And the rather than the factors of 10 to the factors, set the expectations as the need arises.
Tracy, you've mentioned earlier that you and AT&T are users of some of the power platforms. You also mentioned that you participated in the 5G challenge. You and I have talked about ways in which you have also made proposals for AT&T to build or be a part of a team with NTIA or others in constructing an open source, an open testbed. Why? What do you spend a lot of time balancing these needs, the needs, of AT&T's commercial efforts with some of the research needs. What are you seeing, from AT&T's point of view or from your point of view, that what gap is being filled, in this by some of those efforts?
So I'm going to restate from the operator perspective what was already said, which is, there is very much a need to not loosey-goosey, but for operators to come together. It's a worldwide effort in the O-RAN Alliance, and put use cases on paper. If you go to o-ran.org, download the use case task group, most recent use case specification, or maybe they're calling it an informational report. And interestingly enough, 2 of those use cases you'll see on the NTIA RIC forum. One, of course, is energy saving, and the other is traffic steering. So, it's not, conformance testing, getting the components to be reasonably consistent with an open industry standard is fundamental and foundational. But that's not the only thing, moving right along, that OTICs are for. AT&T was the original co-chair of the Testing and Integration Focus Group, and now I'm the co-chair of the Next Generation Research Platform Group. And if you, again, go to oran.org, OTIC guidelines make it very clear that they are places for rigorous plug fests. They are places for, proof of concept demonstrations, public expositions, public expos, as well as outreach programs and workforce development. I think both Northeastern and OTIC and the Cosmos fraternity do a great job with their summer programs, bringing in gifted, you name it, gifted and talented high school students, PhD candidates. We had again, back to NSF Convergence Accelerator,
Mhm.
you know, we meaning AT&T and Fujitsu and Ericsson and University of California, Riverside, you know, those weird academics and NYU Wireless and Columbia, you know, we're all working on one of the Track G Phase 2 projects. And we had kids, again, gifted and talented high school kids, as well as midshipmen from Annapolis and a couple of cadets from West Point working on our security and mission R app with an open source based service management orchestration framework. So I think we have the beginnings of a sustainable, you know, regionalized nationwide program.
Yep.
And I'm delighted that the Chips and Science Act of 2022, right, 2022, established the Technology Innovation Directorate and NSF.
Yep.
And looking forward to hearing some news from NTIA
Well,
about testing and evaluation.
speaking of that,
Like when?
maybe I'll put all of you on the spot. Let's, for a moment, NTIA put $145 million NOFO out into here about that was focused on test and integration. That's going to make test and evaluation. Sorry, thank you. That's going to make that there'll be an announcement at some point. But let's pretend for a moment that we don't know what will be announced there, or what the folks are going to work on. They're going to put another NOFO out in early 2024. Maybe start with you, Tracy. If you wave a magic wand, you're writing that NOFO. What are the top 5 requirements or bullet points, or what are a couple bullet points you put in there as to what you think should be funded?
Okay.
With, you know, the
Now
next
you're going to
NOFO?
think I'm saying this just to make Paul feel good.
No, I mean, that's why we're all
But-
here, right? We're all here to make Paul feel good.
Number one,
That's why he
we
invited
need-
us.
we need a portable open source stack, CUDU, because we've gone on and on about, you know, the Open RAN Alliance, and, you know, let's have a RAN we can all work with.
Yeah.
So that's number one.
Yeah.
Uh,
Excellent.
and it's not in, you know, order of importance. I'm just, you know, number two is let's realize the potential of O1. I mean, we all talk about O1 as though it's real.
Mhm.
It's not going to be real until there's an information model and a data model that stays open, but of course always has to accommodate proprietary extensions. Number three, and I think Scott, you talked about this, you know, let's be a little visionary. Let's, you know, go to the use case task group documentation and start, you know, just like what NTIA is doing. Select a couple of use cases that are like stretch goals, and that include, you know, AI enablement, both non and near real time, Rick, and, you know, groovy things that we're not doing yet. So I think that's enough, right?
That's great. I mean, you're just doing their job for them. Rich, what do you think?
A little bit back to my earlier comment. So, you know, as much as we can know about the user I'm gonna take back the application, the user profile. What do the users do when they're on the network? Because effectively we build emulators, whether they emulate the devices, a network element, the traffic over them. So the more we know of that, then we can build smart data sets, smart as realistic and reproducible. So when developers are in the lab building things and they find problems, they can recreate things to fix the problems that they see. And then we're helping solve problems throughout the network lifecycle, from development to deployment, and then feedback loops back into it. So the more of that, the better, and that helps us from our side.
So you would have the NOFO, you know, dig in deep on some of the user profiles and
Again,
use
as
cases.
much as we can understand, given who the customers are, absolutely.
Good.
I think from my perspective will be developing your use cases for 5G because to what Rick mentioned in terms of having a user profile. So that could be like what are some of the direct use cases for a 5G network and in various settings, both like an end user consumer retail setting, but also an enterprise setting, and developing some of that because that's what's going to power the deployments of these networks.
Dolores?
I would say security. I really,
That's good.
anything that they could do to improve security of 5G would be really helpful.
Well, let me pull out a little bit there. What would you challenge a respondent to in a NOFO to help push along the security question? And where do you take that?
I don't know, because my first answer would be maybe something like modify the standards so that they're even more secure. I know they tried to design for it, but
Yeah.
even more secure. But I mean, the other approach is really like more red teaming and more being able to quickly fix the things that are found, the gaps that are found.
I think all of the above. So, well, I think from NSF point of view, I think we would like to see the community comes up with what is important. So that's, I think, what we want to do is just give out the money to do whatever you think is important. No, seriously, I think the impact. I think it's not that we don't do, our research universities don't do good research. I think we have excellent research. I think it's the missing pieces that get into the next level, how we use that research to be impactful. And I think that's where we can focus a little bit more. So I think all of those things that mentioned are important, but also there's the already 60 draft recommendations are out. So that should give some idea about where the global telecom industry is converging.
In the grand balance, right? You're writing you do this all the time, SJ, but you're writing a solicitation, you're putting funds out there so the government can help get over some of this next hump. There's a balance between are the funds going for equipment? Are they going for personnel? Are they going for basic research? Are they what's top of the list in your minds? Is it going to fund more personnel to run test and integration centers? Is it going toward more equipment that it can be open and accessible to everybody to use? Is it going toward more basic research? Where's the balance?
I think, from what I have seen, there's different programs across NSF that are focused on different pieces.
Sure.
That's one thing. But I can talk about TIP specifically. We would like to see everything together. It's not just the workforce development. It's not product development. It's not just technology maturation. We would like to see all of them. Mm-hmm. So yes, of course, you have to balance, what should take priority and all that. But we would like to keep everything, I would say, balanced.
Nobody disagrees. You shouldn't just, Rich, you just don't want them to uncork a whole $150 million of new equipment, right? No. I'm kidding, but not really.
No, so, you brought up the microelectronics commons thing, or somebody did earlier. Yeah. So I sat through a number of those presentations last week, and I do get it. We have to do something to start building that next group of resources who are going to be involved in testing if we're going to lead the industry, lead the world when it comes to these technologies. Yeah. So we can't look away from this. So listen, I'm happy to sell you equipment. That's what we do. My kids get skinny if I don't, but there is a balance there, and I that definitely has to happen.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of some of these, testing and test beds is that you do build, right, the next generation of folks who struggle through running these tests, managing these tests, encouraging the tests. Thoughts about other efforts that we could use nationally to develop the workforce that we're going to need for some of this? No?
All right. I'm gonna hog the mic one last time.
That's fine.
I think it's no secret that there's a severe shortage of engineers, technicians, cybersecurity experts. I mean, whether it's universities trying to, get the right students, working on the projects that are of most interest to them, as well as to their professors, as well as to industry, as well as broader societal impacts. So huge opportunity to build on the foundation that, again, I don't want to, I mean, NSF Power established a really great foundation. You've got these, I like to think of them as public research centers, as well as workforce development centers, as well as everything that we say an ORAN Open Testing and Integration Center is supposed to do.
That's right.
We've got one in New England, we've got one in the Southeast, we've got one in Utah, we've got, maybe we need, another one up near INL, Idaho National Lab.
Yeah.
And federate them. Let's not expect each and every one of them to design, define, document a curriculum. I mean, we don't have too many people with the skill set to succeed testing Open RAN technologies. You got to have somebody who's a software person, knows a little something, hopefully a lot more than that, about RF technologies, reads 3GPP specifications, joins an ORAN call. It's really going to be a challenge to get the people. And you've got a bunch of people my age and older who have all this tribal knowledge and aren't going to be around forever. So.
Yeah, no, I was actually, that was going to be the next step. Yes, Paul.
A little bit of audience participation. So I want to answer both questions in one go. So what would I like to see in the next NTIA NOFO?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest messages we got today was very clearly the strongest catalyst for mobile wireless security research in the last 6 years has been an open source, stable UE implementation. So that's exactly what I'd like to see come out of the NOFO. I'd like to see an opportunity for somebody to develop a fully open source, stable UE implementation with clear acceptance criteria, technical acceptance criteria that they can build on. And then the second point is to the workforce development, that if you want to find the people with the deepest knowledge on the wireless systems, look to the security researchers. Because if you want to break something and if you want to really look deep into something, you've got to learn about it first. So I'd say tick both boxes.
That's fantastic. I love that. Let's keep the audience participation theme here. Are there questions that you all have? Great. Thank you, Tim.
Hi, Todd Presley, OCS. Question. I'll start with a statement. The first statement is Open RAN is not a small cell technology. It is meant for all. So then the question becomes, when will the technology mature so that AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile can deploy Open RAN technology on macro sites? And what's preventing it? And when do you think that will happen? That's for the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to answer that question.
You want to ask me?
Sure.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not an operator, so I really can't answer that accurately. I think when operators have the confidence that what they buy, these Open RAN systems, will interoperate in particular with what they already have out in the field, that would go a long way. And also seeing that reliability of the Open RAN subsystems, so running for longer than just a test, but running for 6 months or whatever. So that's my opinion.
Tracy?
Dolores spoken like an operator. And we don't want to wait forever. I think I've mentioned on more than one occasion that, not just AT&T, but, operator members of the ORAN Alliance want to start cautiously, conservatively inserting Open RAN technologies in our existing 5G LTE macro RAN. And that's why I'm looking forward to, doing a controlled introduction, let's say, which could mean whatever you want it to mean, right? That would take mainstream vendor radios and pair them up with the srsRAN CU/DU stack. That's one opportunity. Other opportunities, of course, in the other direction. Take some no-name radio from who knows where, some crazy inventor in his basement, and get it working with the incumbent dominant RAN vendor base stations. It's not going to be like, we're going to wait for 3 years or 4 years and then voila, we're going to be ready to deploy at scale. We're just going to have to start doing it. And as Buddha says, the path is made by the walking.
More questions. Rich, did you have some? No. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to dominate the microphone, but it's an interesting question because I see there's a mismatch where the O-RAN specifications are tailored to tier 1 deployment. But because of that, the initial implementations don't scale down. And you need the initial implementations to scale down to be able to fulfill the smaller network use cases, the private network use cases, to prove the pudding in order to demonstrate to the bigger operators that this actually works.
It's interesting you say that, because again, I just did this interview last week at the cable show with an analyst who was saying he sees a rosy outlook for Open RAN, but not in brownfield large-scale network deployment in the next few years because generalized downturn, 5G is already deployed, whatever else. But he sees a ton of opportunity in some of these enterprise use cases, some of which can begin to pile up a bunch of enterprises and you get to substantial deployment. But then the question becomes, number one, is Open RAN built for that environment? And then number two, how many enterprises will make you comfortable, Tracy, to go put this in into the AT&T network more broadly? I mean, that's again, I think that's the sort of tipping point that folks are looking for here.
So it sounds like there's a lot of things going on, both in creation of test lab, OTACs, and others. Testing vendors are obviously providing tools and equipment for testing. But if I put myself in the shoes of the equipment vendor, they're not in the business of interoperability research. They're in the business of selling network devices. The question is there work going on somewhere to define like a minimum set of tests or minimum test scenarios that will enable vendors to kind of get a go, no go and be ready to deployment with tier 1 operators, or just certify like in the good old days, NEBS compliance, Telcordia, things like that? Or do we have like a smorgasbord of test labs and equipments and everybody can pick what they like? Where are we heading?
I'll start with that. So from the standards, we're highly active in the standards body. So what we strive to do is to wrap as many test cases around those at the onset where we can, but in our platforms to make them open and to be able to accommodate those test scenarios that we can't think of. And this plays into a lot of the government use cases, again, things that may not be standards based. So we try to build our tools to those types of architectures to start. We are listening to the market as well, where we're delivering this as test as a service for some of the smaller labs and smaller operators. Now, with some of the research community, back to the people question, our goal is not to bring bodies in to perform that work, but we can do knowledge transfer along those lines of best practices that we've seen over the years. So some of this is familiar, so that we've seen in LTE and other types of network architectures. So we're trying to leverage what we know already. So I don't know if that completely answers the question or helps some way. That's what I can.
And this doesn't, I don't think this directly addresses you, but it occurred to me that if a couple of years ago, I did this very unscientific search for open source 5G test tools, particularly on GitHub. And all I could find was people with good intentions who like started a site and then, they never really finished it. And so maybe you guys know if if people have progressed since then, but I think there probably is a space for some open source test tools that could be readily shared for students or for startups, that are just getting started.
My question was less about we need more tools, but less tools. We need
Focus.
convergence on the proper way to test.
Yeah, I think what Joe mentioned, like some of the Open RAN adoption, more adoption on the private 5G networks, and what Rick was saying, like the use cases would determine the subsets of the test cases and the KPIs and performance and all of that. It's a little bit of a work, especially for private 5G on us. So specific use cases would determine the types of tests that we want to do on an Open RAN system. Yeah.
But Hardik, one of the things that was interesting about this interview I did last week was that he was mentioning that, with some of the private networking use cases, again, number one, it tends to be more greenfield, but also the folks asking tend to be looking for fairly specific, narrow uses, and that this analyst thought that the signal he was getting back was that some of those narrow use cases would benefit from Open RAN in a way that, using a more proprietary radio system would not. And so the fact that they were out there looking for an enterprise scale private network for a particular thing, whether it was drones or delivery vehicles or warehouse management or whatever the case may be, that was actually going to end up driving folks toward Open RAN who may not be thinking about it, because they're not operators. They're not looking to run a large scale public network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, typically private networks or enterprise networks will want integration with their existing enterprise networking systems. And so an Open RAN system would be more favorable to that. And that drives a significant use case for Open RAN into those systems. Like, for example, management of traffic that's going through their firewall, going through their policy engines, or optimization of RAN for particular use cases in particular building, and then some other use case in a different building versus a completely third use case outside. And being able to configure one network 3 different ways in an enterprise setting is something we can do with Open RAN.
Yeah. More questions, other thoughts?
And one thing, as operators, 5G, LTE, macro RAN, or 5G systems become more resilient, which is the desired outcome of intelligent control, we become less risk averse. So it's more likely that, big operators with huge brownfield networks will take more risks because we have the confidence that we're not going to clobber FirstNet for the sake of argument.
Great. Any other questions?
Yes, I guess I'd like to share a story from sort of a small business perspective in terms of using test beds and things. I think we were a contestant and a winner of stage 2 in 2022, I want to say, last year. And so thank you, Dorothy. And the lap time was like super helpful, super useful. We're very tiny company. So, it's some of the professional test sets, not something we could afford. So that was really helpful back then. And then I would say, like, as we're pursuing contracts and stuff, we didn't really know how to approach some of the labs, some of the power labs and things like that. But through my own outreach and assistance from Jeff Reed and some other folks, were like, oh, okay, actually universities are approachable, right? If I can carve out, we're going after phase 2 right now. If I can carve out 1 grad student, 2 grad students, that gives me access both to the manpower, which is really hard to find, but also like access to the lab where I don't have to commit my own resources to it. So I think the path is there. I think it's not it wasn't well understood by me until it took like 18 months to kind of figure that out. for whatever that's worth. So I think there's, yeah, I agree. There's a kind of outreach thing of like, as a small business, how do I get access to these labs? How do I get access to manpower to like actually run them, right? Because it's not just access to the lab. It's like, oh, I got to spend, a week to 3 months understanding how to use it, right? So I just wanted to share that story. Thank you.
That's great. No, and I think that goes to a lot, that goes back to one of the things I mentioned, which was the academic research facilities have a ton of value. There's a, multi-million-dollar investment. There are grad students, which again, we've talked about the benefit of that kind of flexible workforce, but then they're not geared toward, for lack of a better term, sort of customer service and onboarding, right? Like that's not the primary focus. And so ways in which you could bridge that gap, SJ, I don't know if it's something that you and Tip have thought about a little bit in terms of ways in which you bridge the gap where, again, the university structure and the structure of the environment is not necessarily saying like, okay, well, we're ready to go and train up some folks from these companies to use the test beds. And yet, I don't know, sometimes that's necessary.
Yeah, I think there's several ways you can do. I mean, the power platforms are already there. So who leads them? That's already determined. But even within that, for example, the power project office, they can be so in that type of efforts. It might help the platforms to be sustainable. I mean, after initial NSF and other funding, that might be the model to, not these, multi-million-dollar investment kind of, sit there and, accumulate dust. So it can be actually useful. And going forward, I think beyond that, some other investments for test beds or platforms like that, I think personally, I always try to ask what is the model after the funding. I usually ask that. I'm an academic, but I also have been in tech entrepreneur, so I talk the language of what is the deliverable, what is the business model. So I think that's something that you have to build in at the beginning. So, but for those platforms that are already there, I think that it's a little bit difficult, because once you give out the NSF funding, after that we can't ask anything. So that's
Any final questions before I have one more item I want to ask, but anything else from the audience? Hangwei. Oh, here you go.
So maybe if I may piggyback on the discussion here, I think traditionally when we think about academia, it's faculties and students, right? Do we feel that, especially as we think about these tech, research translations, is there any opportunities for maybe NSF and mission agencies together with industry to help build this new kind of a group of folks who focus on research prototyping the services, and that's not traditional, cannot be done very well by students, and think of a third arm of academia, which is professionals, research groups, and so on.
I think there's already those type of programs within TIP. I think the Convergence Accelerator is probably one of the examples. And I mean, to the best of my knowledge, those programs are flexible. So you can actually propose the way that you want to, what you are trying to achieve, and they can fit into those programs. But that's the type of thing actually I would like to see, the things that, take the, basic research and translate. And that has to be, it's beyond publishing paper and, the PhD student advising level, right? It has to go a little bit further. And but, I mean, we can talk, offline, but I think there are several programs like that. And also some programs in the pipeline also that can help, to achieve those type of things.
Thanks, SJ. So just to wrap up then, I think this has been a fantastic day. And let's imagine a year from now, Paul brings all of us back here to have the same conversation and celebrate a whole bunch of successes. What one thing would each of you like to be able to say you're excited to have seen happen plus 1 year from now toward towards some of these challenges with needing more test beds to fill more of these gaps? Tracy, do you want to start?
That as 5G LTE hardware, software in operator networks starts to age out, our policy is to insert replacements that are preferably open source, virtualized Open RAN technologies.
That's great. I hope that happens next year.
I think from my side, pretty clear transition plan from the research labs into the commercial or government adoption. I mean, that's the end game. So.
Yeah.
More deployments based on Open RAN architecture and sharing of learnings from there back to the community.
Thanks, Hardik.
That the RIC Forum, which is being held at the end of March 2024, has been a big success and shown us that indeed XApps and RApps are a feasible way to control your RAN. And I will just note for academic folks, well, for everybody, the deadline to apply is October 30th. But if you're an academic applicant, you can request assistance with your travel to make it to the RIC Forum.
Great, thank you.
As usual, I think all of the above, but specifically, I think I would like to see much more integrated, collaborative approach between the academia, industry, and the government agencies, targeted towards what we want to achieve. It's I think the basic research we have, and we don't want to take the focus away from basic research by any means. But I think we can add. I think we can add and build on that, and that takes, I think, understanding that we are not, minimizing, or we are not saying basic research is less important or anything like that at all. I think it's just that what all we're saying is basic research, we can make it much more impactful.
Yeah.
And we can accelerate its impact by having these partnerships. And I really hope that, through these type of, discussions, we can make you guys aware to, participate in those efforts, and hopefully we can, advance the next G wireless.
Thank you. Thank you all. So Paul, you'll have to have us back next year to celebrate all those successes. Please join me in thanking the panel today. Thank you all very much.